My name is Stephen Kotler. I'm a
I spent 20 years working towards building this studio. It's my dream setup come to life, and I love it, but let's be real. My entire studio could be made obsolete by a microphone, an audio interface, and a $500 MacBook, which can do everything this all can do at the same time and more. If you're new here, this whole channel is dedicated to the joy of making music, and week after week, I sit in front of these machines and show the viewer what it's like for me to go from start to finish making a song. I inevitably get asked a lot of questions about the gear I use, why I use it, why I don't use other gear, should they buy the gear I use, should they buy the gear I don't use. Every so often though, I get the question that every hardware user hates. Why don't I just use a computer? Why even bother using anything else? I actually think that's a pretty fair and valid question, especially if working on a laptop is all you've ever experienced. Why should I bother with the Octatrack or MPC or any of this stuff when I could just use a laptop? And I have an M1 MacBook Air that I use to map out this video, to make the thumbnail, mix the audio. Why use a bunch of limited, expensive machines when you could get nearly or exactly the same results on something the size of a composition notebook? What kind of sunk cost fallacy am I living in? I mean, I know plenty of people who come from recording or mixing backgrounds in the 80s and 90s, surrounded by the kind of gear I'm using today, who have since moved on from hardware completely because of the workflow and convenience of being in the box. That's slang for doing everything on a computer. And when you put it like that, it seems like the obvious better choice. If a computer is something people likely already have in their home and it's cheaper to get the software needed to make music, why would anyone use hardware now? In that light, it seems like a waste of money and space to use anything but Ableton or Pro Tools or FL Studio or Logic. It seems like I and others like me are just blinded by nostalgia or romanticizing the established legends of the past. So let's dig a little deeper on what this question is actually asking so I can give you an actual answer. This video isn't any longer than it needs to be. I just feel like in order for my answer to make sense and be understandable from all sides, we have to clarify and possibly dismantle a couple things first. I'm going to approach answering this assuming I or whoever have the resources to actually make a choice on what tools they use to make music. A golden rule of art is to use whatever is accessible to you. The inception of hip-hop and many forms of electronic music arose from that mantra. The fact is, most people already have computers and phones and can't or aren't willing to spend money on a sampler or a sequencer, which is totally fine. And I don't suggest people buy this stuff if they don't either A, have the disposable income to do so, or B, already have a career in music in which these things arguably become more relevant to you and your way of life. Spend as little money as you can to get what you need to do the job. And before I go any further, I bet you there's already some people writing a comment about how these machines I'm talking about are also computers. And yeah, they'd be right. Basically anything that has an operating system for computing can be argued as a computer. All of my synthesizers are technically computers. Your microwave is a computer. Your car is probably a computer. They're just focused machines and interfaces with computer integration. They were built for a specific job, and that's what they do. I actually just had to open up and replace the motherboard and power supply in my Prophet XL synth, and the process was way more like building a PC than I thought it would be. Pretty eye-opening. On the other hand, PCs and Macs, which is what we're talking about, are traditional computers with wide open OS platforms that can run countless different programs, shape-shifting them into anything you want them to be. I mean, video editing, music making, drafting for engineers, video game development, Bitcoin mining at this point. These products are nothing short of miracles. If you're watching this video, you likely have one, and everything else pales in comparison. So why do I go through all the trouble of orchestrating all of this? I mean, am I really that desperate to make my YouTube videos aesthetic? I try not to be dismissive of this question because, and this is why I wanted to make the video, I take very seriously the underlying philosophical battle that's happening underneath that question a lot of the time. One that possibly loses sight of the importance of art in the first place, but we'll get to that in a second. First, I want to point out the humor in the current state of hardware versus software debates. Nowadays, it might be weird seeing someone make music that isn't on a PC or a Mac, but before computers were the norm for music production, they were actually seen as exotic in the music world. Imagine a world where digital recording cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and is reserved for only the most cutting-edge studios and private millionaires. Data is expensive, and a gigabyte hard drive that's 1 gigabyte looks like a refrigerator-sized death ray weighing 500 pounds and costing 40,000 US dollars. Congrats, you're in 1980. I don't have an inflation calculator with me right now, but I'm gonna say that would be more than 40 grand in today's money. Point being, computer-based music production was out of reach for most, and the norm was analog equipment for the same reasons computer production is the norm now. Even the samplers we all know and love today were children of samplers like the Fairlight CMI and the Synclavier, which were samplers that were more like the computers you would recognize as computers. They had computer screens and sometimes even keyboards and styluses. They were also prohibitively expensive. It was much more realistic for companies to mass produce something affordable that swaps the full computer interface and capability for a cheaper board, an LED readout of numeric values, plastic buttons, and rubber pads. And that affordability is
Writer-director James L. Brooks comes the perfect holiday comedy
My body exploded in sweat. My first happy sweat.
about an imperfect family.
Oh, your father, your brother, and your husband are the ticking time bomb in your life.
Tell her she ruined
Everything! All right, I'll tell her that!
this holiday season.
Ella, you're trying to be responsible for everything. You can use a scream.
Every movie, talent show, and viral success story tells us the same thing, that brands can profoundly shape our actions and even our physiology. This is Tylenol, and this is generic store brand medicine. They have the exact same ingredients, so they should work the same, but they don't. If one of the pills costs more, it'll be more effective. Even the color of a pill and its packaging can dictate how effective it is. It's all in the branding and design, and this extends far beyond Tylenol. Wine tastes better when poured from a heavier bottle. Food tastes better when it's plated beautifully. Just the mere presence of a MasterCard logo can trigger customers to spend 30% more than they normally would. Companies understand that brands are like placebos. They use all sorts of mind tricks to get us to see what they want. It's gotten to a point where brands aren't just selling you a product. They're selling you a tribal group identity that they want you to be a part of. They reel you in with clever branding and beautiful design. So how do they do it? And is this a good thing, or is company branding and design all just a bunch of manipulative BS? I've spent over a decade thinking about this throughout my design career, and I've read a lot of books to try to answer this. And because the answer is so nuanced, I've created a BS intensity spectrum, which is based on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. On one end is a little drizzle of creative liberty, still grounded in reality. But the other end is a category 5 fecal tempest of deception, where companies toss truth to the wind just to drive sales, creating a huge gap between marketing claims and actual reality. On this quest to unravel branding insights, you'll get a deep understanding of human psychology and how design hooks into our primal instincts and desires. So let's work our way up the continuum. The most basic form of branding is simply labeling your product, which has been around since at least 2000 BC. Craftsmen would imprint symbols onto their goods to show where they came from. This may not seem like a big deal, but it's actually a very important way to protect customers. The Soviet Union learned this the hard way. Brand names were seen as anti-communist, so bread was just labeled bread. No matter what company made the bread, the packaging and labels were all the same. If you bit into some bread that was stale or moldy, you had no way of knowing which company to avoid. Producers weren't held accountable, so the quality of many products were truly terrible. This wasn't only about bread, it went as deep as rivets, those tiny little things holding ships together. Factories churned out unbranded rivets that got jumbled up into one central facility. No one knew where each rivet came from, so once again, there was no incentive for companies to make good rivets. So why does this matter? Well, it starts to matter a lot when ships start springing leaks and sinking to the bottom of the ocean. The Soviets did finally end up having factories stamp their brand names onto their products, and quality went up. Producers were held accountable, and customers knew which brands to trust.
Sometimes nothing brings people together like a nice hot pizza from Pizza Hut.
Branding helps solve a problem called information asymmetry. This is when sellers know everything about what they're selling and buyers know almost nothing about what they're buying. If you're buying from a well-established brand, there's a lot of information and inherent trust built into that transaction. So branding isn't always about manipulating into buying things you don't need. Without brands, there's an increased incentive for companies to create a cheaper, lower quality product because they make a greater profit while suffering no reputational consequences. Now, that's one good reason for branding, but as designers and marketers know, branding is really about influencing people emotionally. This can be used for good or evil. For example, we don't brush our teeth primarily for health reasons. I mean, sure, that's definitely a big part of it, but for most people, that's not the main reason. If it was, we'd brush after every meal. But take a moment and think. When do you usually brush? Probably before an important meeting or a date, usually before you eat. Nobody's vigorously brushing after secretly annihilating that chocolate bar while binge watching Netflix. Brushing your teeth is about being confident and removing stains or bad breath. And that's also why toothpaste is usually mint flavored. It makes your mouth feel fresh. The mint doesn't give any practical health benefits. We might think we do things for logical reasons, but emotions often drive us. Many people believe emotions are unreliable, but they're actually crucial evolutionary shortcuts that help us. For example, our strong dislike for dirty or rotting things isn't based on a logical understanding of germs. Our caveman ancestors that stayed away from rotting things lived longer, so we developed a negative emotional response to it thousands or even millions of years ago, way before we ever knew about germs. Emotions tap into a biological and intuitive need without all the processing. And good designers know this emotional alchemy like the back of their hands. It's like buying a Tesla. The buyer might insist that it's because they want to take care of the environment, but it's more likely that it's just fun to drive and show off as a status symbol. Otherwise, they just drive a Nissan Leaf or something. So anyway, look, these branding examples are all pretty harmless, but things will get worse with the rising tide of the BS continuum. The next level of the continuum is about visual shorthand. So here's a simple example. Toothpaste stripes. And yes, this is the last mention of toothpaste I'll make in the video. But why have stripes? Once you start brushing, it all mixes together anyway. The stripes don't serve any logical purpose, but they do look cool and they show you that the toothpaste does more than one thing in a visual way, like fighting cavities and freshening breath. People love any visual, visible effort that goes into a product. If you just say that it's an improved toothpaste formula, but it looks exactly the same as before, it's not as convincing. If you add something visual like stripes, it's a lot more believable. Adding visuals to highlight real benefits seems reasonable enough, but we steer into murkier waters when designers add elements that don't honestly convey the product's benefits. Car companies sometimes add fake vents to their car designs, for example. Lots of car enthusiasts complain about this because it makes the car look more powerful than it really is. It feels a little dishonest. And this is maybe a hot take, but I rank this example pretty low. Cars are sculpted to exude power and agility, and designers do all sorts of visual tricks to convey that. Why draw the line at fake vents? What about the flashy styling lines or fancy rims? They're mostly visual shorthand, just like the vents, and no one complains about that. Imagine if we got rid of any visual element of a car that was not primarily functional. A Lamborghini would start to look more like a 1996 Camry. If we think back to the Tylenol example from the beginning of the video, looks can genuinely affect how we perceive things and even how effective products are. Maybe those fake vents or cool rims are a placebo that helps us drive better. At the very least, it keeps things interesting. To be clear, I think visual shorthand does become a problem when brands use it to highlight an element that is completely fake. For example, there are some speakers that have 2 drivers in them, but only one of them is real. When you get speakers with fake drivers, it's messing with the main reason you bought them, for the sound quality. You probably paid more thinking that the extra driver is real. On the other hand, fake vents don't significantly change how well the car runs. We don't have time to meticulously analyze every single detail when buying something. For most purchases, you just make a snap judgment based on a few indicators. Imagine analyzing and comparing price, specs, materials, and quality for every single item on your grocery list. You just go insane. That's why visual shorthand is valuable. Branding and design helps to convey what's good about a product without making us do all the work. There are situations where we make more calculated decisions when there's a lot at stake, but most buying decisions just aren't that important. Most of the time you're right, sometimes you're wrong. It only becomes a problem when companies actively try to deceive us. This type of visual signaling extends way beyond the design of the product itself. We don't just buy the thing. We buy based on the trustworthiness and reputation of the person selling the thing. Nice packaging and storefronts are signals that they're trustworthy businesses counting on repeat customers. A company that spends time after you have bought and paid for a product to make sure you're not disappointed.
Here he is now.
Hi, I'm just trying to make sense of all this data.
Just get Saspaya.
Saspaya! No!
Oh, wow. The quickest way from a billion points of data to a point of view. Saspaya. Raise a rocher to making it home for the holidays. Celebrate the holidays. Raise a rocher.
Your eyes lie to you. Watch these circles. They look like they're moving.
Iguana costumes!
Deal! And if you lose, you have to go through the airport in your iguana costumes.
Deal.
Dummy, they like their costumes! If you lose, you have to go to the airport in your undies! Deal!
It's time for Olmec's Temple Games. First challenge, the walls around Atlantis are crumbling. You must rebuild them by stacking rings on these poles.
I am the monarch of the sea. I am the ruler of the...
Steven Soderbergh is a weird guy. If you don't know who he is, he directed the Ocean's movies, the Oscar award-winning Traffic, The Nick, one of the most grossly overlooked cable shows on the planet. But then in 2014, just because, he took Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Gus Van Sant's 1998 shot-for-shot remake and combined them into a single film, which he unofficially uploaded to his personal website, Extension 765. He then took Michael Cimino's 3.5-hour Western epic Heaven's Gate and shaved it down to just under 2 hours, dubbing it the Butcher's Cut, out of love. Most pertinent in this case, though, is what Soderbergh did with Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark, desaturating the film, removing all of its original score and dialogue, and replacing it with Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor's electronic scores from The Social Network and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Why? As an exercise in blocking and staging. In simple terms, blocking is the way actors in a scene are told to move. Staging is the way actors and objects are positioned locally within a frame. Spielberg's genius as director has always been in his ability to effortlessly synthesize the two to create shots that are both dynamic and efficient. By removing key elements that are familiar, coloration, dialogue, a melodic score, Soderbergh's goal here was to isolate Spielberg's decision-making, to focus only on the visual, how his scenes are staged, how his shots are presented, what his rules of movement are, what his cutting patterns are. What's amazing is how clear the purpose and relationships of a scene remain without any sound. Take one of the film's most expositional scenes, for instance. 4 men in a room. 2 we know are strangers by the way they politely accept seats, while Indy, the most important, stays highest in the frame, and Brody, clearly allied and comfortable, leans against the podium, remaining on Indy's side. No need for inserts of the 2 men sitting down, since Spielberg manages to keep all 4 actors fully visible in the same frame he opened with. Then when we do cut, we get 2 opposing sides, separated in the middle by an object of interest. And while it literally isn't the focus of the shot yet, it almost always remains in frame, which allows Spielberg to reuse this framing later on when Indy does this. But it's his group shots that show off Spielberg's staging best. We've already looked at this one, but later, when Indy's explaining something important and all eyes and ears are on him, we get this, framing him alone in the corner, then this shot where we look where they're looking, and finally, when all 4 characters come together and are literally on the same page, we get this, and the foreshadowed book becomes the center of their attention. For Spielberg, it's all about capturing multiple dynamics as efficiently as possible. Take this scene, only this time focus on its use of levels. From her introduction, we know that Marion can outdrink anyone. So here, Marion and Belloc start out as equals. Until Marion literally drinks him under the table, remaining beneath him to give him the illusion that he's got power over her. But when she reveals her true intent, she gets upstaged by Toad, who has the real power in this scene.
Look at her, using pull-ups training pants just like undies. I'm so proud.
I'm a big kid now.
Do you hear that? That's the call to conquer new terrains. The same call heard by those on Firestone tires. Firestone, for those who answer the call of the vagabond. Get more tires for your next journey at firestonetire.com.
See what scholarships you may qualify for. Visit gcu.edu.